I was probably 6 or 7 the first time that I went fishing. I grew up in Araby, Louisiana, which is just kind of behind the Ninth Ward of New Orleans. Like a lot of, Flatlander Louisianians, when it would rain, the levee would flood and we would, canoe through the neighborhood. And so I was kind of surrounded by water in that neighborhood unintentionally. But the first time I went fishing, I had one of those old, kind of push button Zebco rods. And I remember, I don't know who taught me this, but I know that I went out to this canal behind our neighborhood, and I put broken off pieces of hot dogs on a hook and under one of those little plastic red and white bobbers that you can often see kids fishing with. And I was catching brim in this canal, and I was so excited that I would catch a brim, and I would run 1.5 blocks down to my house and put it in the bathtub, hopefully before it died. Turns out brim don't like bath water. They didn't make it. I almost didn't make it either when my mom found out that we had a bathtub full of dead fish. But one of the sayings that I've come across in fishing is the tug is the drug. This idea that when you feel a fish on the end of the line, something alive comes alive in you. And from that moment on, fishing that canal with pieces of hot dog in South Louisiana, I've always loved the idea of fishing. I didn't learn fly fishing till much later in my life, but fly fishing I would learn is nothing like that. You don't just cast a line out and hope that something likes hot dogs. Fly fishing is not passive. We don't sit, we don't wait. Fly fishing is active, and it's very particular. It's specific. Nothing about it is general. It is very pointed. The same man who gave me my first fly fishing lesson, teaching me that there's nothing fast about fly fishing, shortly thereafter gave me the second fly fishing lesson I ever got, which before I could fish, he said, I need to teach you how to read the water. And reading the water is about understanding what's happening beneath the surface that you can see. It's about taking in whatever river or estuary or saltwater flat is telling you about itself, and understanding the implications of what you're seeing in regard to what's happening underneath it. I mean, a river, for instance, it's nuanced. A river even the same river doesn't move at the same speed in the same places. It's not the same color everywhere. Boulders and bends affect how the water flows, and little eddies and swirls and color changes and break currents that you can see on the surface are telling you loads about what's happening under the surface. And under the surface is where fish happen to live. I fished a pretty spectacular river outside of Eugene, Oregon, called the McKenzie River. And in the McKenzie River, they have a species of trout that's native to those waters there in Oregon, and it's called a red-side rainbow trout. It's a specific breed of rainbow trout native to Oregon. And I met up with a fishing guide named Alex so that I could fish the McKenzie River with him, and he could teach me how to catch these native red-side rainbow trout. And I asked him about reading the water and how you read the water, and this is part of his response to me.
Yeah, so fish, I often say, it's really important to be able to read a river. You can come out here with the right presentation, and if you're fishing in the wrong spot, you're not going to catch any fish. And so knowing where fish like to hang out, and I like to say that fish are similar to humans in the fact that they don't want to work really, really hard for their meals. They want to go to a spot where their meal is going to come to them. And so finding a place where there's a little bit of current, especially in rivers, that's what you're looking for. But there's not too much current. Because if there's too much current, then the fish are generally having to work too hard. They're exerting way too many calories and way too much energy in order to find a meal. So finding these places right where like my fly is landing, that's softer moving water. It's out of the main current. Um, it's really important to be able to identify the places that you're going to find fish. Otherwise, you're going to spend way too much time fishing for trout in places or fish in general in places where they're not. And so that can be frustrating. And you might not be as rewarded if your goal is to catch a lot of fish. So finding out where fish like to be is crucial in regards to catching fish.
Oh, came at it twice. Woo, woo.
Oh, sometimes you can do everything right.
Did you get that take?
I like the fact that Alex said fish are kind of like people. He says they don't like to work any harder than they have to get what they need. Fish, as it turns out, are always hungry. So fish in a river are always facing the same direction. They're always facing upstream. They're always in slower moving water, near faster current, because they are waiting for the faster current to bring food to them as they wait in the slower water, which is demanding less energy and less exertion for them. And they're always facing in the direction that the food is going to come from, just waiting to see something that they want. And once you kind of understand this about rivers and these different spaces and paces of water, reading it is pretty simple. Discern which direction the water's flowing. Where does fast water meet up with slow water? And if you could discern those two things, then you know right where the fish are going to be. And when you take into account the fact that those fish are always hungry, looking for food to be brought to them by this current, well, then that's when you can begin to fish. And like Alex said, fish are like people. Maslow's hierarchy of needs shows us what all people are hungry for. What we're all looking for. I'm going to give you a reminder back to your fourth grade class. But the base of the pyramid of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, he says we have basic necessities like food and water, the basic essential building blocks of life, the bottom of the pyramid. And once those things are met, we have a basic need for safety and security, shelter, to feel like we're going to be okay. And above that, we need relationships and community. And above that, we need a purpose within that community, a reason for being, a sense of accomplishment. And at the top of this pyramid of these hierarchy of needs, there's what he called self-actualization. This is the idea that I'm fully reaching the potential, my potential as a human person. It is human nature that we are all in pursuit of those ends. But that's not the only story. There's something else that is true of all human beings too. The truth is, we all know that the world is messed up, that it's broken, that pain and loss and inequality and disease and death are part of the human story, and we push against it and we rail against it because something deep down inside of us tells us it shouldn't be this way. We can feel it. Of course, in the Christian tradition, I call that the reality of that sense and feeling of brokenness within without sin. But regardless of what you call it, all human beings can relate to it. We experience the world as a broken place where things are not as they should be. G.K. Chesterton is a Christian philosopher and theologian, and he wrote this about sin. He says, original sin is a fact as practical as potatoes. Whether or not a man could be washed in miraculous waters, there was no doubt, at any rate, that he wanted to be washed. Certain new theologians, he writes, dispute original sin, which coincidentally is the only part of the Christian faith which can actually be proved. They essentially deny human sin, which they can see plainly before them in the street. Chesterton said the only non-deniable Christian doctrine is the doctrine of human depravity, of brokenness. He says the world is filled with evidence that humanity is in a broken state in needing of redemption. as Paul quotes in Romans, that all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, meaning God's image in us is marred, it's maimed by sin within and without. And that doesn't mean that human beings are incapable of dignity and morality and beauty. It just means that none of us and nothing in this world is as it should be. And deep down, everybody knows it. Whether we want to talk about it or not, we all know that it's broken. We want redemption. People call redemption by 1,000 different names. We might be in different places on the river, but we're all looking upstream for something to come by and provide for us the thing deep down that we are ultimately longing for. Once I learned how to read a river by standing in it long enough. All water became water to fish in. Soon after I had learned some of the basics of fly fishing when I was away in Montana, I went for a little 3-mile hike up this trail near Big Sky, Montana. And at the trailhead, there was like a little introduction to the trail and a map of it. And I saw a piece of paper pinned to this sign. And it just said, "Lost green fly rod tip. If found, please call," with a phone number and a name. Now, fly rods, most of them are in pieces. They're like most rods that I have are 4-piece fly rods, and you piece them together to make the whole thing. And so apparently somebody had taken this hike and lost the end piece of his fly rod when he went up there. And my thought was, I didn't know there was water up there. And so I went back to my car and grabbed my rod. And sure enough, after some miles, I found water that intersected with that trail, and I found fish in that water. My hike got interrupted by a fishing trip. And that day I caught a beautiful species of trout native to Montana called a cutthroat trout. It's a beautiful fish. And that's also the day that I learned I'm never going to go anywhere without a fly rod, because the truth is you never know when you're going to run into a stream. In Luke chapter 19, we read a story, the story of Jesus and a man named Zacchaeus. The story begins this way. In Luke 19, verse 1, it says that Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. This is in Luke chapter 19. At this point in Jesus' ministry, he really, by the end of this chapter, is going to be entering into Jerusalem for the final time. He is not going to be on this earth much longer as he is. And so he was on his way through Jericho from Galilee, passing through, because he was ultimately headed for Jerusalem. He was ultimately headed for the cross that awaited him. I mean, essentially, he was going through Jericho, but he was on a hike to someplace else. And the story continues, and it says, "Behold, there was a man named Zacchaeus." And it teaches us some things about Zacchaeus. It says he was a chief tax collector, and he was rich. And he was seeking to see who Jesus was, but on account of the crowd, he couldn't, because he was small in stature. So he ran on ahead and climbed up into a sycamore tree to see him, for he was about to pass that way. Some of you right now can't hear that without hearing that song, the children's song, Zacchaeus. Well, I'm not going to sing it, but Zacchaeus had almost all a man could possibly want in regard to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. He had rich foods, he had a large house, he had a sports car and a driveway. He had risen as high as he could in regard to his vocation. But he was still hungry for something else. And he just didn't know what. And he hears that Jesus is coming to town, and he's heard some things about him. And so he figured he wanted to see what was it all about. So, short as he is, he climbs up in the shade tree, which is right next to the road through Jericho. And like every other fish in the river, he is looking downstream for Jesus and this crowd coming at him. And this crowd is flowing by, and then Jesus floats by and sees this man in a tree. And Jesus, he sizes him up pretty quickly. This guy's a chief tax collector, morally corrupt, despised by people, no friends, very wealthy, very empty. Zacchaeus climbed the tree that day because he was hungry for something he didn't have. He was looking upstream, I think in the hopes that what was coming toward him might be exactly deep down what he knew he was missing. It says, when Jesus came to the place, he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for I must stay at your house today. The passage begins that Jesus was in Jericho passing through, no intent to stay. But then he comes across a stream. So he stops and he starts fishing. And he wound up fishing all day for Zacchaeus. And Jesus did indeed intend to just pass through, but the truth is he never went anywhere without his fly rod. He was a fisher of people after all. I love the end of the story. We're going to fast forward through some things, but in the end of the story there in Luke chapter 19, it says, Jesus says to him, to Zacchaeus, today salvation has come to this house, since you also are a son of Abraham, for the Son of Man came to seek and save the lost. Zacchaeus was hungry to be redeemed to the covenant that he had forsaken. He no longer felt like a son. He had walked away from everything that had been given to him as a son of Abraham, and he knew what he lost, and he longed for it, and he found in the ministry of Jesus the redemption, this restoration to be who God had created him to be. Jesus, as he says, had a heart for the lost, and he could read the water. And on this day, his hike through Jericho turned into a pretty successful fishing trip. Do you want to know the name and the first century bishop in Caesarea? Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus became the bishop of Caesarea because Jesus stopped walking and started fishing. A number of years ago, I went on an offshore fishing trip for yellowfin tuna, which is as fun as it sounds. I got back on a Saturday, and by Sunday afternoon, I couldn't bend my arm. And on Monday, I went to the ER, and by Monday night, I was admitted to the hospital because of an infection that I had gotten and a cut on my elbow. And they couldn't figure out what it was. I had a PICC line in my arm feeding me IV antibiotics to try to combat this bacterial infection, and nothing they gave me was working. And I wasn't so frustrated about the elbow. I was frustrated because I had a lot to do. I had a lot going on with work. I didn't have time to be wasting in the hospital while they're just trying to figure out what's going on with this infection. I really wasn't worried about the infection. It just seemed to me like this can't be that complicated, guys. Like let's figure this thing out. Of course, they were worried about the fact that the infection was spreading beyond my elbow into my arm and the implications of that. And by the time Tuesday rolled around, it had become quite swollen. And I felt stuck. I felt stuck there. So on Tuesday, it's early in the morning. I've visit people in hospitals. I'd never spent the night in one personally for anything that I had a need for. And, it's 3 a.m. and this machine keeps beeping, beep, beep. And it's driving me absolutely batty. And I'm praying one of those angry prayers. I don't know if y'all know about the angry prayers. I call them Lieutenant Dan prayers. Lord, why me? I am stuck here. I have better things to do for you than to be stuck in this place, and I'm frustrated. Why? It didn't make sense to me. And as I'm praying and kind of venting, deep in my spirit is the best way I can explain it. I hear it. It's a simple word. It's plain as day. You're not stuck here. You're sent here. And then in walks this young orderly that I'd seen half a dozen other times and ignored the whole time. Only this time I understood that I wasn't stuck there, I was sent there. And so I began to read the water. And this young woman was in a hard place in her life. She was looking for something, for a friendship to be reconciled, for purpose and direction, and in kind of an aimless life. And over the course of the next 2 days, while they tried to figure out what in the world this infection was, I got to share Jesus with this young woman. And I realized something in the midst of all that I may have been in the hospital because of an infection, and I only ever wanted to just pass through it. The hospital seemed like something that I just needed to get through and behind me as quickly as possible. But a river runs through it. And God used that to help a young woman hear the voice of her Savior again. As people whom God has sent into the world to catch people, I mean, what would change if we began to realize that wherever we are, at work or at home, in our neighborhoods, at the ball field, in the recital hall, in family gatherings, in grocery stores, in coffee shops, in break rooms, and in hospital rooms, that we're sent there with a purpose to all those places, and a river runs through it. And our calling, in part, is to, one, embrace the identity that we have been given as those whom Christ has sent out with intent. And as those sent out ones, in these places where we find ourselves, it is ours to read the water, to look beneath the surface of why it is we think we're anywhere, to see the people in those places who are looking for something, like we all are, for something to come by that can satisfy the brokenness that we know we all feel deep down beneath everything else. So the question, I think, becomes for us is, think about the river where you stand and these different parts and seasons of your life. Where are the people in the river where God has sent you to be? And what if I told you that they are why you are there? That your job might not be just about your job, or the grocery store might not be just about the groceries, or the golf course might not just be about your score. But what if the people in those places are people where God has uniquely positioned you, has sent you to share with them the very thing that it is deep down they are looking for? And that's true even in places where we don't want to be, in places where we'd rather just be passing on through. I mean, Jesus was just passing through Jericho, and then he saw Zacchaeus. And as it turns out, as my friend Alex taught me, fish are kind of like people. So he stopped and spent the day fishing instead, because that's what anglers do.